Please subscribe to this channel and we'll keep the comedy clips flowing. And now...
I didn't break the planet. It was this way when I found it, all right?
Everybody laughed when I first said I wanted to be a comedian. Well, they're not laughing now, are they?
You know why it's laminated, don't you? To catch the tears of joy.
It's a Celtic phoenix. People are thankfully being stupid again.
Welcome to Gurus of Comedy.
With your host, Dave Keeshan.
Yeah, so Alfie, welcome back. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for really indulging me. It's been a bit of a hard path to get you on, so I guess we have to start all over again. Tell me who you are, what you're doing, and how I got to you.
Well, my name is Alfie Noakes. I run a group in London called the We Are Funny Project. It's been going for over a decade. I'm not a comedian. I'm an MC, a promoter, and a teacher. And I think we made contact because during the lockdown, I've been focusing on developing my YouTube channel. And you came up on my people you might know list, and that's how we've made contact. And I feel like you're a new friend already.
Thank you. We've had so much conversations already. Yeah, so as I was saying to you on a previous attempt at this, that the lockdown's been something else, and just not being able to get on stage and things like that. I've been experimenting with just trying to get out and producing some content. And you actually sent me an email just tell me about your YouTube channel, and whatever way you wrote it, it really spoke to exactly what I was trying to do. So I said, okay, so this is a guy who is kind of at least on my wavelength, so I want to talk to you. So I think that's kind of how I got here.
And here we are.
And here we are. So just to kind of touch on it, like I just have to pull you up on the you're not a comedian and like an MC. I always find that a bit strange. Like in Australia, I've noticed that it was you never really had a dedicated MC in a room. It was always like a comic, and you would kind of rise up to it. But more back here in the UK and in Ireland, you nearly always have the one MC that seems to always do it, and that's kind of, I just find that a bit odd. But it's still, I always find the MC position tough. It's kind of, you have to be a very tight comedian. You kind of have to work in almost 2 minutes or 1 minute increments almost, and having to have material at that level.
Yes, but you're right. Different countries have slightly different cultures in the way the comedy's performed. I mean, I'm sure as you will know, if you're in America, often they don't even take breaks during a show. Certainly the pro shows, they've just got table service, and the show just keeps on running. In America, when the MC or host hands over to the act, they'll practically leave the stage before the act is on the stage. We've got all these little different ways of doing things. But from my point of view, I never really wanted to be a comedian. I kind of found myself falling into this as a really long-term comedy fan, and then found out, I think on the first show I helped somebody promote, I caught like 5 joke thieves that night. And I didn't realise quite how deep my knowledge of comedy went. And I did a few open mic spots on a night that I was helping to run. My first gig was really, really good, if I'm honest, by the standards of the first gig. And then, of course, with that becomes immense overconfidence. And my second gig was about the hardest car crash you could ever imagine on stage. So I ended up having to go and emceeing, and that just so much more suits my forte. I'm better at riffing and telling stories, and I really have no appetite to travel around the country or even internationally, when at that time I had a young child. So, and just to be clear as well, my background was television production, so putting on the shows, promoting, coming up with new formats for shows to keep the scene fresh, much more my forte than scribbling down notes of everything I see funny in a given week and whittling it down to a new joke in my set on an open mic on a Tuesday or whatever it might be.
All right, that's interesting, because I always find stand-up is one of the truest forms. You have to be writer, director, performer. When you start out, you're kind of everything, and it's only when people really seem to take off do they maybe kind of afford a writer and kind of take some of the load off, or have someone produce it. And but I think it's I like it in that it's a pure form. You're kind of if it's successful, you are the reason for the success because it's all you.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm really, very much into the open mic side of things. I'm very fortunate. I've produced well over 1,500 shows and had some of the biggest acts in the UK headline for me, but it's typically because they want to work out some new material or anything. They have no cause to come down and perform at an open mic. otherwise. But open mic is really where it's at its purest. There's a lot of kind of raw emotions in the room, people nervous on their first few gigs. Indeed, people nervous on their 300th gig, people nervous about new material, and then you get the triumphant moments when an act I've seen tank, hard every couple of weeks, but it's really hammered away at it, showed some real character integrity. All of a sudden, there seems to be a magic switch. Sometimes it's after 150 gigs. Very occasionally it's after 50 gigs, but you can see they've got something and they figured it out. So, and it's the ultimate meritocracy. There is no cheating in comedy. They either laugh or they don't. And
I
as you rightly
totally
say,
believe in that.
when you get to, yeah, absolutely. And as you rightly pointed out, when you get to the upper echelons, when you're arena and you've got your television shows named after you and the like, I don't necessarily think that's any reflection when they bring in writers on their lack of talent. I think as much as anything, it's a reflection on their lack of time.
Absolutely.
There is only so many hours in a day, so that's where that tends to come in.
Yeah, no, I like John Bishop. I like some of his earlier stuff, but I found that he was getting spread so thin that the material that he was putting out it just felt very diluted. But he had some DVD and it was like a good 15 minutes. I said, there's not a joke in here. He's amiable and enjoyable to be around, but there was no jokes. But then the audience was also happy to be there with him, and I said, I know it's different,
Yeah, there's a good number of parallels between kind of rock stars and comedians. I think there's something of a acknowledgement there where rock stars want to be comedians and comedians want to be rock stars, and rock stars famously have the tricky second album syndrome. They break through with something big, which is drawn from their entire life experiences of wayward youth, and when they're 24 years old and all the rest, and then they've got 12 to 18 months to bring out the second album, and usually it flops. And I think what a lot of people forget is, the world's best professionals typically are taking 2 years to generate a new hour of material. And in the meantime, working out in incremental chunks and bits, hopefully in quiet rooms. And I think we've all heard, and indeed seen, sadly, part of the problem that comes with that in the age of the smartphone is, a Dave Chappelle or a Chris Rock, just to use examples of people that really have been bitten by it, are just trying to work out a bit. It's not honed, it's polished, it's a premise they're trying to get to its final form. And some idiot in the audience films it, releases it to YouTube, and all of a sudden there's an outrage. So these can be kind of tricky times for those professional guys. Guys and women, they have to protect themselves. Whereas the open mic room, I've always done my best, because that's my first and foremost role as a promoter and a producer of those shows and the MC on stage, is to protect the act, because open mic is very, very special, and it is where everybody must begin.
Oh, it absolutely is, and even after you've begun, it's still a place I think people should come back to, because trying out new material and trying out concepts, it's still, I think, invaluable. Like I've seen some big names come back and try out stuff and die, and they say that's the only time you'll ever hear that joke because it failed. But I just want to kind of maybe start off a bit with more the beginnings of like open mic. So I did open mic for 5 years in Sydney, and there was definitely a concept of. Now, I personally thought I would have a TV show within the first month, obviously. Cause,
as do about half of you open micers. You're nothing special there, Dave. You're nothing special now, sir.
Yeah.
None of us are.
And then after the first month, I said, oh, well, maybe I'll just give another month. And then when I wasn't coming, I was like, oh, okay. And then I began to realize, like, the hard work. And, you were only as good as maybe the night before. And every day after, like, one of the best gigs, you're still back pounding the pavement trying to get more gigs. And it was kind of humbling, but also informing. And there was definitely, I eventually talked to a few more seasoned people. And there was definitely a concept of doing your time. You had to do your time to kind of really kind of get out there. And I think that was true. I mean, you get like some just bizarre geniuses that kind of just seem to just come in like a meteorite, and they're just like amazing out of the gate. But the reality is there's some solid people, but it's hard work.
Yeah, well, the hard work, if you're serious about it, there's no getting out of that whatsoever. I mean, I think Jerry Seinfeld said in that, great documentary Comedian, he was walking past a building site one day, pondering about wanting to be a comedian or a better comedian. And you realise, just looking across at the guys with drills and, laying bricks, like, I'm going to have to work at that level. I was going to be after 8 hours of hard work a day and then go and gig. So people who are serious about it have to put in the hours. I mean, I've had about 5,000 to 6,000 different people perform on my stages. I've watched well over 500 people do their first gig, that's for sure. And at the end of the day, the open mic circuit, which is really what I can speak to, it tends to be populated by half a dozen or so different types. There's those people who just want to come and do a gig so they can spend the rest of their lives telling people at dinner parties that they used to be a comedian, also known as wankers. Then you've got people who are very...
I'm just worried where I'm going to fit in here. Is that the bottom level, is it?
Well, I would say so. Doing one gig and then resting on those laurels is pretty low. Then you've got the people who are very funny in the pub, and their friends tell them they should try it, and then they come and try it and realise it's something of a different skill set. And some of them fall aside quickly because they can't make the transition, and some of them figure out, okay, it's a slightly different language, and they often move on very quickly. Amongst my favourite people, at least off stage, are the guys who are a little bit older, to be honest, because they're coming in for a bit of fun, rather than being a member of a golf club or just sitting in the pub talking. They'll sit in the pub talking and take part in a show. And then you've got those who are ruthlessly ambitious, and they tend to fall into two camps: ruthlessly ambitious and therefore have some talent and put in the work. And I've observed some wonderful success stories from people whose very first gig or gigs were with me, who are now, absolutely crushing it in all sorts of forms of TV and radio. And then those who are super ambitious and sadly don't have the talent, the work ethic, and sometimes character can come into it. I've seen some very good comedians kind of burn themselves on the circuit just because nobody likes them. Nobody wants to work with them. They're too greedy, they're too ambitious, they're too self-serving. So you've got all this kind of mix and match of characters happening in the room, and as the promoter and the MC, as well as, of course, looking after the audience, it's my job to manage a mixed bill of experience and talent and demographics and keep everything kind of running smoothly. That's one of the good things about open mic as opposed to pro comedy. And make no mistake, I love pro comedy. That's where I came in by my love of Billy Connolly and Bill Hicks and George Carlin and all of the people in my youth. But you've got to love comedy to do it. If you don't, then you're not going to get too far. And otherwise, it's a good fun hobby. It's better than playing golf.
I have to say, I literally had that experience towards the end. There was a comedy club, and it literally was like a club for me. If I was in town and I wasn't performing, I'd drop in, and there'd be a few people you knew, and you might sit down the back and you have a few drinks and have a few chats, and it's like, oh, this is not bad actually. I prefer this than, yeah, I wouldn't be a golfer to be fair, but it was nice.
Yeah, well, I think most comedians do have their home club, like that old TV show Cheers when the fat guy walks in and everybody shouts Norm. I think most comedians do have the club they know they can look up to, and their friend who promotes the night will do their best to squeeze them on without bumping somebody else. And, they've got their friends who tend to congregate there. I think one of the things about We Are Funny Project is the fact that we've never been a bringer gig. So I think as one of my friends once said or wrote, who was a regular at the club, he goes, We Are Funny Project is a place you could go without friends and still have friends. And I think that made a big difference. It creates a certain kind of atmosphere that the audience is there for real, not because they've been dragged along on some commitment they made vaguely 3 weeks earlier.
So I always found the struggle was to kind of get some guidance of kind of whether you were working or not. Well, there was two things. One, I used to call myself a wannabe comedian, and the guy said, "Look, you on stage, you make people laugh, you're a comedian. It's that simple." I was like, "Okay, that's one." And the other one was I actually think it was Seinfeld. It's like comedy is the only thing where you turn up and you do it. It's not like you turn up to work on a brain, like a brain surgeon. Your first day is like, what do I do? Whereas like comedy is like, there's the mic, there's the stage, off you go, and you learn the hard way. It's everything you learn backwards. It's like, okay, that works, I won't do that again. But it's a very harsh proving ground. But people who come through it, they kind of get tighter and harder.
Yeah, I'd have to challenge the idea of if you're there on stage, you told a laugh and made people told a joke and made people laugh, therefore you're a comedian. Because I have played football on a field with my mates and scored a goal, but I promise you, I am not a footballer. I have made a bowl of cereal or made some toast. It does not make me a cook or a chef. I think there has to be more of a line. And it's not necessarily about being professional. by definition, is you're making a living from doing this. I know some really, really fine comedians who still have occasional day jobs or even full-time day jobs to make ends meet or to keep the money at a higher level. But I think, to be fair, you've got to, wherever the line in the sand is, I don't know, but let's say you did 2 gigs a week for a year and you've done 100 gigs and you've eaten humble pie, a word you mentioned earlier, how humbling it is. If you're prepared to be humbled over and over and keep on going, then I'd say after, and it's an arbitrary line in the sand, 100 gigs 1 year, I think you could call yourself, something of a comedian at that point. But you probably want to prefix it still with open mic. The biggest and one of the most talented acts I ever saw come through my room over the last 12 years, I think it is now. He was just blew everybody away on I think it was his 3rd gig or something like that. He's something of a household name at this point. His talent was unquestionable. He just had it. But it was still about 4 years before he signed an agent, and another year or so before he started cropping up all over the place in print, media, radio. There is no absolute shortcut, because it takes however long to get your first 5 minutes, and then from there you've got to get your first 10 minutes, and then you're 20, and then you've got to get recognised in the club sets, and then you'll get signed by your agent, and they'll give you some conflicting information, and so on, which is why I tend to avoid as much of that as possible by just focusing on the open mic room and helping my guys progress. Give them a 7 instead of a 5, give them a 10 instead of a 7, give them a chance to MC, give them a headline spot, and then sooner or later they'll move on or they won't.
Well, I suppose it was a bit facetious. For me, I think the measure of someone you probably could call a comedian is someone, you're the room runner. There's like someone who was supposed to turn up, they haven't turned up, and you got to send someone on, and they can fill 5, and they're a safe 5, and the room will laugh. And it's like, just... Yeah,
that sounds like I'm sure there's more than one definition for this. I'm sure that was really one of mine, not even just mine, one of mine. I think that's absolutely fine. No newbie, somebody who's never done it before, could go up on stage and handle that. And in the scenario you've described, yes, there's lots of people who can go and fill for 5. So yeah, that could easily tick the box. I agree.
And then the other one was like, I kind of, as one moves towards professionalism, there was like the... people who are good, but you ask for 5 and they do 10, or you ask for 10 and do 20, and it says no, I didn't ask for 10. I didn't ask for 20. I asked for 10.
Yeah, and those are the people that I kind of nodded towards a few minutes ago, is the people that actually do have the talent and will get themselves washed out through character flaw. And if you constantly overrun, then the promoters, the bookers, the agents, the TV producers, we don't have time for that.
Yeah, well,
we just don't.
And that was my point when I had mentioned to him, is like, when someone's asking you for like 7, they want 7. They don't want like 8 or 6. Can you do 7 if you're asked for it, or if they ask for 5, can you do 5? And that's hard. It's kind of it's an unusual skill to kind of develop, that you kind of you're in the moment, but you have to be out of the moment to kind of understand if you're going too far or not enough. But I think people who are good at that, they do progress. Maybe they're kind of almost like session musicians. They're reliable. You can drop them in safely, and they get corporate gigs, I think, a lot faster.
Yes, I mean, I've been in awe at times where I'm watching, somebody who's, television. I say television's a standard, really, but television level, at least on the way to being some kind of household name, and they'll come in to run a 20-minute spot, and I'm just in awe at how they are like, well, that's it for me, ladies and gentlemen, in 19 minutes and 59 seconds, and they're not wearing a watch. It's part of the skill set. It's not just reading the room and writing jokes and performing. There's all these nuanced extras that you have to develop over the years, and that's one of them, keeping to time. It's not fair on the other acts. It's not fair on the other audience. I've always made it a very, very strong point to keep my rooms entirely fair. So there's no example of one of my friends just popping up so that I bumped somebody who booked a month ago. That's never going to happen in my room. The stage is always set up exactly the same for every actor as they come on stage, and everybody gets exactly the same amount of time, the same warning as to what happens if they overrun. It's just a really good way of not getting yourself booked.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I speak from the open mic circuit.
And that's
very much from the open mic circuit.
And that's what this topic's all about, is the open mic, because it's the kind of the... I kind of came in exactly as you kind of described, a bit of funny around my friends, had a kind of a weird style. I think that I said, okay, this lends to stand up a tiny bit. So I went off and did a course, then did a graduation night, and people said, oh, you should come back, and kind of slowly worked our way through. But you kind of got. I think the guy. I think one of the guys at the course was he had this one funny story, a 5 minute story that he rambled on for basically one punchline. That's not a bad story and probably great with his friends. But in a stand-up, you kind of nearly have to be hitting like a punchline every 20 to 30 seconds, really. And it just, the room was kind of dying, which is kind of interesting to see that style.
It is. Well, I've actually recently, you asked at the beginning how we become in contact, and it's kind of because of the endeavours we've been doing during the lockdown, and as well as me launching the We Are Funny Project YouTube channel, I've produced the first downloadable comedy course, because often I would produce workshops, I think about 14 different workshops. The only one I taught was the MCing one, but I bring in professionals to teach things like clowning, character comedy, musical comedy, and so forth. So I've been distilling a lot of what I know and have learned and observed over the years. One of the truest things that you can say there is, you've got to work out some of the techniques of transferring from being funny in the pub to being funny on the stage. And like you've just said then, a 5 minute story that ends up in a one punchline is just painful. You are looking for, certainly in the pro circuit, a big laugh about every 20 seconds. I know a really great pro who, Edinburgh Perrier winner, in fact, who goes for a laugh every 7 seconds and a big laugh every 20. But then you can go to the other end of the scale, and Stuart Lee, who I think is commonly regarded as, and rightfully so, one of the best comedians in Britain. And first of all, he's on record saying he doesn't think he would ever go down well in an open mic room. They just wouldn't know what they were getting from him if he wasn't already known and understood to some degree. And second of all, one of the greatest jokes I've ever seen in my entire life was from him, and it was a 7 minute setup with absolutely no laughs or jokes in it, until finally you get to the punchline, and the tension was so excruciating. It was one of the biggest laughs I've ever given or heard in my life. So, master those basics, a big laugh every 20 seconds, absolutely. But then you can go off and be a Stuart Lee type genius and mess with the recipe and show there's other ways to do it. But open mic being my forte, that's where you kind of go to learn some of the essential rules and themes and ideas. And also you get to see a dozen or 15 other people that night, and you'll learn as much watching them either do well or frankly do badly. That's something not to do as much as you will from your actual performing time. Maybe not as much, but you'll certainly learn a lot. I get quite frustrated watching acts who, once they've performed, basically disengage from the show, or before they're up you can just see them running their set in their head over and over, and they're not paying attention to the other comedians. Anybody who runs an open mic room will tell you the worst possible audience is a room that only has comedians, which is why I always have. I work very, very, very hard to get actual audience, because as I'm judging by the sound you just made, you'll know what I'm about to say is other comedians have either A, already heard your set because they're on the same circuit,
Most of the time,
something's never that funny the second time. B, they're just running their set through their heads, so they're not even listening to you. Or, God forbid, the comedian on stage drops a genuinely funny joke. Their first instinct isn't to laugh. Their first instinct, very often anyway, is to kick themselves and go, why didn't I think of that?
Well, I split that out, that and the technician, that they're like taking it apart and they're all like, interesting, that's an interesting joke. So did you laugh? No, but it was very interesting. It's like, oh, laugh!
Yeah. So that's something I like to think I'm a little bit free from, because as I've always stressed, I'm not a comedian. I don't have any ambitions to be a comedian, but I've watched over 25,000 performances on the open mic circuit alone. I think I've figured out most of the major kind of rules and constructions, but I'm still free to laugh.
Okay.
I don't have any of those I'm not wearing a comedian hat, and I'm still free to laugh when something's funny. So that's why I can still enjoy myself in an open mic room, all these years later. That said, don't get me wrong, I very often will tell a comedian who's a regular who's telling the same material, I'm like, you've got to stop telling that set or those jokes here now. I'm bored, you're boring me. It's time for you to generate some new material. And also, by the way, I've created many formats, I think a dozen or more formats, to force acts to generate more material, to make them get outside of their comfort zone and get back to writing and stop leaning on their solid 7, because it's just not good enough. It's boring and it's uncreative.
You're wasting time, I think, in an open mic if you keep doing the same stuff. I mean, if you're out on the road kind of getting proper gigs and it's audiences you haven't seen before, it's like this is, lab tested. But the open mic is less lab tested. I mean, I kind of my format was top and tail with some good material that you kind of know works.
Yes, of course, absolutely, yeah.
And then in the middle, maybe try stuff out. And then if it's dying on its arse, which happens way too often, you might kind of
then you run back to what Dave tried and tested stuff. No, absolutely. But it's worth bearing in mind that some people's ambitions end in the open mic room. That not everybody is looking for a national tour or a Channel 4 show with their name in, or whatever the hell it might happen to be. Some people just like going out telling jokes. They've already got a good paying job and a wife and family that doesn't really suggest that they should be on the road touring, going up to Grimsby on a Thursday night. So, there is all of the different types of people in the room to be borne in mind. And, one way or another, they have their own agenda. And it's only a percentage of them that are truly ambitious. Some people are doing it for a hobby and to have a laugh with their friends. And that's as far as it goes.
Yeah, I think I see that completely. Like I'd probably be in that bracket, wife and kids at home with a proper job. It's like to be out on the road every night. That I've heard some stories of, wow, that's hard work, hard work.
Oh, it really, really is. Yeah, it really, really is. And then you've got the long journey home as well. The way that I see it, I used to be a film journalist, believe it or not. I was a TV producer, director, but I specialised in cinema. So I know quite a lot about celebrity, because I used to spend a lot of time researching and interviewing these people. By and large, they're not very happy once they get what they thought they wanted. And these are cinema people, I should point out. So often they've got like a Winnebago and a personal assistant and all of this. Even when you're a top comedian in Britain, you're still going to be travelling up and down motorways, stopping at service stations, and the best food to have is at Ginsters, and you're away from your wife and kids for, nights, if not weeks at a time. There's quite a heavy social cost to pay. And when you get to a certain age and you can't have the drink and the drugs as part of the equation anymore, it can be something of a Pyrrhic victory. There's got to be a true love for comedy to get you through that, I think. A lot of people, I think, believe that success is going to be something different to what it is when they get there. I can assure you, I've known enough famous people who have lamented the paparazzi to me. Just going, I thought I was going to be able to, drink and dance and screw, like Jarvis Cocker once said. Except I can't, because whenever I tried, there's somebody with a picture, with a camera to take my picture. And isn't that ever more true in the smartphone world? So I think people need to pursue their ambition for the best of reasons, and the best of reasons is because they bloody well love it.
Yeah, well, I do think, and I started probably about 12 years ago. Did it for 5 years in Australia, then went off, had a baby, then came back into Ireland and started again, and it was... Okay, obviously the people were slightly different, but it felt like the generation was slightly different. It was like the YouTube generation. It was the
how interesting. Yeah,
you can get out. I mean, yeah. They kind of, like, I didn't realize this was a thing you could do when I started, which was a big mistake on my part. But I remedied that when I eventually found out. But these guys, the YouTube generation, they're getting content up. They kind of already presenting themselves to the world. So stand up. For them seemed to be kind of a fait accompli. I will do this. Didn't mean they were... I felt the quality wasn't quite as good, because I felt the people who were finding it the 12 years ago who didn't have the YouTube were kind of, I don't know, more pure. Like, it took them harder or longer to find the path, but they were looking for the path. Whereas the YouTube guys kind of didn't have as hard to find. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, this is quite a complex subject. When you first mentioned YouTube generation, I thought you were going to go somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah, you actually, I think I pretty much agreed with everything you went on to say. All the same. The YouTube generation. So literally, I left making television and documentaries the year that YouTube launched. So I'm pretty au fait with kind of the structures of interviewing, writing questions for interviews and putting it all together in a compelling package. And then YouTube came along and rewrote all the rules and democratized all of the technology to make oneself, filmed well and well lit. What used to be a £50,000 edit suite is literally a free app at this point. It's really quite mind-blowing as I'm learning more and more every day with my 14-year-old son.
Yeah, right.
So, YouTube generation one, where I thought you were going to go and say was as far as kind of short attention spans. And to be honest, as far as open mic goes, that's great because most spots, and I know different places, different clubs have different settings. It could be long, it could be 6-10 spots or whatever it might be. But broadly speaking, I'm from London and I operate in London. It's 5-minute spots and then you progress to 7s and 10s and then ultimately 20s. If you don't like a comedian who's on stage right now, don't worry. There literally will be another one along in 5 minutes. So I thought that's what you were saying with the YouTube generation, the short-term attention span. I think, in fact, you were talking maybe a little bit more about the opportunities available to them because they can promote themselves online and get a global audience, not just the people who decided to walk into the basement of a pub on a Wednesday night.
Yeah, well,
Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, no, I think it swings both ways, and I think you and I are probably of the YouTube generation in my respect, in that we're trying to push out content while we can't even get on stage. We're using the channels available to us to kind of be productive and get out there and say, well, I may be limited by what I can do, but I'm not going to be stopping. I'm just going to change and try the next thing. So, that brings us on to let's get into your We Are Funny project in a bit more detail. So you kind of covered it in a tiny bit, but do you want to kind of give the full spiel, the sales pitch?
Don't know if there's a sales pitch as such, but I can tell you what it's been. So I'd already been emceeing and promoting for about 4 years. And then the reason I called it a project is because I had no doubt it would always transform and morph and be more than just another open mic night or night. I think at that time I was running 6 shows a week in 2 venues with the help of a lovely guy called Alfie Noakes. And then we started adding the workshops to it, and then we started adding the formats. So one of the formats is, there's many, the challenge format. So I will pick a dozen acts, either new open micers that are impressing me or old hand open micers that I know are solid, and often some professional comedians, and ask them if they'll commit to performing 5 minutes of new comedy on a given date. And then 2 weeks before the date, I will give them a topic, and they have 2 weeks to write 5 brand new minutes to that theme. And then they would all come together on that night and give their take on virginity, bad boss, worst day I've ever, whatever it might happen to be. We've done loads of them and got some great talent involved. And very often what would happen is, jokes written just for that show ended up in people's long-term sets. So one act even became a musical act because of the challenge show, which is something they hadn't entertained before. So We're Funny Project, you can't watch that many acts that often without me wanting to put a gun to my head, unless they're bringing new and fresh material.
Oh, totally. Oh, that's interesting. I just sent it reminds me, I've been looking at computer graphics and CG rendering and things like that. So I've been consuming some podcasts, and they're going on about creating your portfolio and getting your portfolio, which is very important in the art space. And they say, they love guidelines. They love having a blank page and being able to do anything is a nightmare. It's like if you have to do a space scene with a planet and a spaceship, it's like, okay, now I know where I'm starting, let's go. And that kind of guidelines, I think, is it's really strong. I like it that it provides you can get people to do it, and
Oh no, that was never a problem. I promise you, people were. Don't get me wrong. I never asked. Just because I mentioned him earlier as a great example of a great comedian, I never asked you if you'd do it, and I don't imagine you would have said yes if I did. But I got some really, really great, talent involved in those shows. Often as much as to whether they're actually available or otherwise. A couple of those shows were very controversial. Even had a group try and get one of those shows cancelled and banned because of the topic we were getting into. But yeah, I think there's about something in the region of 14 different formats. So it kept it interesting for me. It freshened up the scene. It forced the act to generate new material. And I'd certainly in those days we were offering more stage time than anybody else. It was about 350 spots a month or something we were giving. But yeah, things have wound down a little bit over the more recent period. And the YouTube channel is basically I'm going through the archives. I filmed most of the shows. Some of those archives is a very early set from somebody who's become a household name. Some of it is a particularly great set from somebody you've never heard of. Some of it is something just really weird that happened during a show. You do 1,500 2-hour shows. That's plenty of time for weird things to happen, I promise you. So it's really a case of going through the archives, finding some of my favourite or favourite people, and then of course I get their permission to post the footage. Quite a few people don't want me to post the footage, which I fully understand. They get no argument from me because that was then and this is now. But yeah, so far we're in the region of about 60 or 70 clips. I'm posting 3 times a week. And then amongst that as well, I'm providing kind of educational or what I call comedy top tips on how to find premises and generate material and performing tips and so forth is interspersed amongst them. So it's a bit of I refer to it as like a comedy magazine, the We Are Funny Project YouTube channel, a bit of a comedy magazine. If you want to watch some comedy, there's some comedy. If you want a helpful educational video article, that's there as well. And I'd say the jewel in my crown is an unseen Bill Hicks interview.
All right.
I've launched the channel back in November, and it's an unseen, nearly 30-minute video interview, or the rushes of, I think 3 minutes of it were actually released in a documentary 20-something years ago. But I have the rest of the interview. So I've promised the world when I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will release the 4th part of the interview. The first 3 are on the channel there now, and it's a very interesting interview as well because the people interviewing him are strange, and Bill's not having any of it. So that's definitely worth having a look.
Okay, so I'll post all those links actually in the show notes. So hopefully you'll get a bit of a bump. We'll get to the 1,000. I'll probably just wrap it up. This has been a great chat. Was there anything else you wanted to push or sell or discuss before we sign off? Anywhere else people can find you?
There's one point, no, not as far as anybody find me. I'm on Facebook and the like, but that's just We Are Funny Project, and you'll find me, Alfie Noakes. But the one thing I'd like to point out is, I think the big issue in comedy has been for a while kind of wokeness and what you can and can't say, and it's a complex subject. I'm not drawing a line anywhere. Though some people who know me privately know that I do. But I would say this, when I was putting together the course for new comedians, I actually found myself coming up with a particular understanding which is directly in regard to open mic comedy, and I think it's worth bearing in mind for anybody who's thinking of starting or is in their earliest days. Okay, the open mic room it's a free space. It's where you can make your mistakes. It's where you try and figure out maybe where the boundaries are, what the people are like, what's funny, what works, what doesn't. And I think it comes down to this. It's simply the open mic room is your kindergarten. It's just somewhere you can just go and kind of find your feet. And then it's a playground. It's a place where your friends are and you can play around with them and have laughs together. And then finally, it's a gymnasium. Once you've picked up a few of the original ideas and you've gotten into the scene, it's where you go to lift the heavy weights and get yourself match fit for that competition or television audition or spot at the festival or whatever it might happen to be. So that's kind of the message I'd like to get out there. Open mic comedy. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of colourful characters. There's some mad people, bad mad people in there, but mainly good mad people in there. But at the end of the day, for comedians, it's a kindergarten, it's a playground, and a gymnasium. And that's the message I'd like to get out there. Open mic's got a lot to offer.
I agree with that totally, and I've experienced that too, and it feels a bit like the Monty Python, not Monty Python, the Faulty Towers episode where it's been out for like 50 years with the Major and he's quite racist. And I said, well, that was the humor and that was the time. But it was true, you might not like it, but it was true. There was people like that. But like now they've had to put these health warnings in front of the show, in case you might be offended.
Yeah, they've just done it with the Muppets, I understand.
Muppets as well.
Okay. To be fair, I haven't watched the Muppets for a long time, and I grew up in the 70s when that first came along. I'm not sure if they were dropping the N-bomb all over the world, all over the place. My guess is Kermit didn't do that. What I would say to that is I actually wrote an article for Chortle, some years, I've written a few for them, but a few years ago, I wrote an article for Chortle touching upon this issue. And one of the points I made, and I think this is something a lot of people don't acknowledge or understand in the first place, so I try and give a little bit of space for people not knowing this, but every generation, academia have a group of historians, modern day historians, who will go back and review what previous historians have already reviewed and give it a new once-over, a new look at it. Because each generation, as they look back, their prism changes. The way that people in the 1960s, LSD, free love, post-World War II era would have looked at Victorian England is very different to a digital 21st century woke movement, for example. So historical reflection is constantly being revised by historians themselves. And it's very easy to get wrapped up in the moment that what was perfectly okay 50 years ago is less palatable now. But I wonder how many of the people who think it's not palatable now have even contemplated how they will look 50 years from now. Everything is in constant revision, and the digital format is allowing, the revision to happen second by second. And I must say, I find it extremely galling, regardless what he said, but I find it extremely galling when I hear like a 6-time ever 18-year-old open micer rinsing John Cleese or Ricky Gervais or somebody. I'm like, I don't think you've earned the right. If I'm honest, you might not like it, but I don't think you get the right to come out and publicly abuse somebody who made the life of Brian or The Office. I think they've earned their right. And people age out.
They do.
John Cleese is an older man now, and new people will come in. So maybe you asked me a couple of minutes ago, is there anything else I wanted to say? One of the things I'd like to say, I know it's not a wish that will come true, but I'd really rather comedians make their points on stage and be funny and incisive and scathing and cutting whilst doing so, rather than being lacking of wit and then just raging on social media platforms. The great comedians say it on stage, not on Twitter. Actually, I'll give Twitter a pass. The great comedians say it on stage, not on 17-paragraph Facebook postings.
Well, I was going. Is there going to be a sign outside comedy rooms now with like trigger warnings saying "Don't enter here unless you're offended by anything," and hopefully then it'll be like a loose filter just to keep them out and we can get back to normal. But
are you saying that's happening, or are you saying you imagine that?
Well, it hasn't. Well, we haven't had a gig in Ireland in over a year, so I don't know what's going to be like on the other side. But
have you ever been into a room where there was a quote-unquote physical sign trigger warning?
Not yet, but you mentioned Facebook. There's been a lot of kind of talk about what's happening behind the scenes and who says what about what, and I'm just a bit concerned. There'll be like two rooms. There'll be the woke rooms, and then there'll be the anti-woke rooms. And
guess which room is going to be full of laughter?
Exactly.
Which room is going to be full of people leaving disappointed, having paid the same amount of money?
Exactly. And I always reverse it. I always simplify it down to one thing: the audience will decide. The audience pays.
Yes.
The audience.
They laugh or they don't.
Yeah, and if they're if your joke is offensive and the audience is not laughing, then it didn't work. If it's a topic and they laugh, it worked, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah, do you know where this real sweet spot there is as well? Is if the joke is offensive and you still make them laugh, because that's a very discombobulating notion for people who want to be seen to be good. I mean, in many ways, I could talk to you about this for hours, so we'll wrap this up very quickly, I promise.
I'll come back another time.
To me, it would be my pleasure. I thoroughly
well, go on, you finish your point anyway.
It really would be my pleasure. Well, it just seems to me there's certain territories where certain groups shouldn't be patrolling others. And look, I'm a very liberal individual, I promise you. I'm not going to start giving you my credentials, but I really am a very liberal individual. But there's a level of wokeness out there. Every group has its fringes, and liberals, we have our stupid fringes just as much as the right wing has its horrible fringe and so forth. But I wouldn't leave woke people in charge of comedy, because comedy by its nature is often predicated on surprise and pointing out inconsistencies and therefore hypocrisies, and playing to a degree with stereotypes. And stereotypes are not necessarily negative.
Oh, I agree.
They can be a stereotype, but by definition, they're not necessarily negative. So I don't really want a woke audience member shouting out stereotype, because that much might be true. But is it an accurate stereotype, and is it a funny stereotype? There's more than one thought process that goes into this, and that's what great comedians know. But woke audiences aren't helping anybody, least of all themselves.
Well, the problem probably with the open mic for this problem is it's usually people experimenting with the edge, and sometimes they actually go too far, because they don't know.
They should do. They have to.
Well, I
They
think
have to.
no,
It's required.
I think they need to, but like sometimes they do, and even they know it's too far, and they kind of go, okay, that's not going to work. But the problem,
They're just testing the boundaries.
but
Agreed. Yes.
but
Exactly.
the problem is that because they tested it, and because it might exist now, and because it might have been captured on video, they kind of can be hung by it. And it's like, oh well, I know it was wrong. I didn't, that type of thing. And like, will that get in the way of some people experimenting? Possibly not myself,
Not in my room. It won't.
but you know what I
In my
mean.
room, I keep. Yeah, I do know what you mean, but in my room, I've done my. Do you know what? In over 20, close to 26,000 performances have happened in my room, and I've been present or emceed over 1,000 of them. And just to give you a sense of how bad the situation is, as far as kind of right wing or offensive or radical white supremacist, whatever you might want to think of it as, the N word has only ever been said, to the best of my knowledge, on my stage 2 times. Okay, just to be really clear. Okay, 2 times out of over 26,000 performances. One was by a white lady making a comment about how her boyfriend's grandmother's dog was called the N word. Okay, and then use that premise to attack racism throughout. If you ever watched the film The Dam Busters, which is based on a great World War II, feat of engineering, the lead's character dog is called the N word. Okay,
I think I
culturally,
remember
it's
that.
wrong.
Because I think they
would
tried
never
to
use
ban
word
that movie,
myself.
didn't they? I think they were talking about.
Maybe so for that reason, but it's a film. It's a film that is worth remaking without the dog in it. It would be my argument. My point here is, in 26,000 performances or thereabouts, only twice. Once was that lady, and it was really just a platform to attack. Look, most racism comes from old people, and they're all about to die. Okay, or at least that kind of racism. That was really her point, and we had 2 people complain about that. And then the other time it happened is I made the point that I'd only ever heard the N-word said on my stage, which at that point was 20,000 performances or something. And the next act up happened to be a person of colour, a black guy. So he walked up on stage and spent the first 30 seconds just repeating the N-word over and over to make a point. And it wasn't funny. It was just awful. What I'm saying here is an awful lot of policing going on for very little crime.
Oh no, I agree with that.
I mean, look, there's more than one issue. It's not just race. I understand that, but the comedy tends to be very left-leaning and liberal in the first place. As we've already discussed, the audience will decide. And if you come on stage with loads of edgelord stuff that isn't brilliantly witty, insightful, and funny like Doug Stanhope can do, then you're just a car crash. You're not getting rebooked, and you probably won't have the appetite to do it for very long anyway. It kind of polices itself. I don't need woke people coming in, pulling the alarm cord when nothing went wrong in the first place.
I think that's very accurate, and I just agree with that. But we'll see. I'm very curious now to see what comes out on the other side of the lockdowns and when rooms start get going again. Some people think comedy is dead or it's going to be kind of reduced, and I think no way. It's going to come back.
They're
and it's
totally
going to come back charging, if anything.
I don't know. It will be a slow rollout for fear of built-up areas. Hard-packed areas. One of the things I know as a promoter is you pack the seats as close as.
In terms of environment, it's the worst environment for a disease. But
are you suggesting a windowless basement with people packed together tightly, with people exhaling loudly, is a bad environment for a virus? Well, you might have a very valid point there.
Yeah.
But
well,
if we take that issue aside,
put that to the side.
What I would say is this. Because yes, as far as it being a super spreader type situation, a comedy show, yes, it is. There's no question of it. So once we get to, and I'm no scientist here, but the vaccines at the time you're interviewing me seem to be rolling out very nicely. It looks like things will be easing off fairly quickly in the near future. So if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
I'm hoping that Edinburgh 2020, I think Edinburgh this year is kind of already compromised, but 2022, I think that's when people will be getting match fit and trying to get back out, and they'll be getting back into the rooms.
I think it'll happen sooner than that. I think there's 2 or 3 things to play here. I'm working on the principle that I'll start running live shows again this coming autumn, and this is 2021 when we're speaking now, spring 2021. One is there's no point trying to do much in the summer because we've got Euros, maybe the Olympics. beer gardens, and people could just be back together again in the park after the last year of lockdown. So there's no point trying to fight that. Autumn, when it's rainy and cold outside, and hopefully the vaccine is really broadly distributed, I think things can come back. But there's two things that I think are going to be absolutely essential for us to bear in mind, and we can take reassurance for live comedy. One is something that I've believed in for years. We already spend our lives on screens so much that a live comedy show is something kind of affordable in a way that theatre isn't. That we can really get to, and it's really not very expensive, whether it's a professional show, which is still not that expensive for a great night of laughs, top-end laughs, or an open mic show, which is a roller coaster of laughs and no laughs, but it's free. So it's live comedy, it's live engagement after a year of everybody being on Zoom and Netflix. And second of all, the most important point of all is simply this: Jesus Christ, the world needs a laugh, and we've got to be here to give it to them.
Can I just put out to you and put out to the world the one thing I'm worried about? Everyone's heard about the COVID-15, the £15 that you're supposed to put on while you're eating chocolate and locked down. I'm worried about the other COVID-15. The 15 minutes of material that everyone's going to talk about COVID for the next year or two, and I just say get rid of it. You know, we don't want to be hearing about everyone's COVID-15 for the next 3-4 years. Just dump it. And new material. I think fair enough. I think we need to allow a certain catharsis. Trust me, again, as a person who's promoted shows for over 6,000 acts, there's a definite mad element of comedy and comedians. To a degree, we need to give time for the therapy and the catharsis to take place. And I'm serious about this. I really am. A little bit of therapy and catharsis. Get off your chest. Let it be a speaking therapy for you, but it's just through a PA, and you're trying to make people laugh. There's always space for that. But, you know, all things equal, it'd be great if nobody really talked about it once we reach 2022. Yeah.
But the fact is, certainly a We Are Funny Project gig, your 5 minutes is your 5 minutes. You're free to do whatever the hell you want, unless you say the N-word or something equally terrible. But yeah, listen, you said, did I want to add anything? I didn't think I did, and I think I've just added 10 minutes to your interview.
That's fine.
So, thank you for your patience, sir.
No worries. Well, we'll probably wrap it up at that then. Alfie, thank you so much for being a great chat, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you very much for having me. Take care of yourself, my friend.
All right. Goodbye.
I hope you enjoyed that video. There are loads more across the channel, and the plan is to add 3 new clips every week. Please subscribe, hit the notifications bell, like, comment and share to help us keep the good stuff rolling out for your delight and entertainment. Thank you,